Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clack, columnist, editorial board.
Greg Jefferson, Metro editor.
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, deputy editorial board editor.
And as you all know, we had a municipal election in San Antonio on Saturday. Some interesting results. Before we kind of start talking about what stood out to us, I just want to mention that, the highlights were Proposition A, which would have decriminalized marijuana and abortion and expanded the cite and release program for SAPD. It was defeated by a margin of it was 72 to 28%. Mayor Ron Nirenberg was reelected easily. And all council incumbents were also reelected, with the exception of Mario Bravo in District 1. And he'll be facing a runoff against education consultant Sook Kaur. So I wanted to. I also want to mention NISD in District 1. There was a race that we talked about on the podcast and wrote about a bit involving Amy Hoffman, who has been very involved in school issues and PTA and everything. But also we had concerns about the fact that she was an election denier and had gone to the January 6th Trump rally. She went to the Capitol, although she said she did not was not one of the people who breached the Capitol that day. But she lost to David Salcido, close race. She lost by about 5 percentage points in that one. So, Greg, I'll start with you. Like, what stood out to you as the big story, and what were the big surprises, if any?
Actually, it turned out to be a fairly status quo election, surprisingly so. I mean, it felt, I think, because of all of the controversy and all of the noise around Prop A, it kind of gave the city election a feeling of kind of uncertainty, right? But in the end, I mean, it lost badly. All the incumbents did well, including, which was interesting, Jalen McKee Rodriguez in District 2 and Terry Castillo, District 5, won easily, particularly in Jalen's case, despite having a ton of opposition in his race. And they both were really strong supporters of Prop A. Which was utterly rejected by San Antonio voters. As we kind of knew, I mean, we've talked about this over the last few weeks. It was clearly going down, a month ago. You could have probably predicted this. Yeah. But I mean, so Mario Bravo, I mean, I think we expected him to wind up in a runoff. Right. Mark White in District 10, he had so much support. Every living former District 10 council member was behind him. The business community was behind him. He seemed to have a good deal of neighborhood support. The fact that he won an open seat without a runoff, I mean, that might count as a surprise, but I mean, he was pretty well prepared. In District 7, kind of on the west side, northwest side, you had an open seat after Anna Sandoval left, Dan Rossiter and Marina Gavito, kind of slugged it out. It was, how many?
I think it was like 42 to 22.
Yeah. And the fact that she came out on top is not really surprising. She had, some good deal of community and business support. She had her dad, a former city council member, current Alamo College's trustee, working on her behalf, Joe Alderete. So that, too, wasn't particularly a surprise.
Right. Yeah. So as Greg mentioned, Mark White is the one new council member we know of. In District 7, we will have a new council member. It'll either be Marina Gavito or Dan Rossiter, and they're going to meet in the runoff. So we got the District 1 and District 7 runoffs to look forward to. Nancy, what kind of stood out to you about the election?
I mean, how long has it been since District 2 keep their councilman? Was it 10 years?
Ivy Taylor.
10 years. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty interesting and important. And I know that Jalen and his supporters were celebrating that. And when we met as the editorial board and we met with the candidates, with all his challengers in that race, I mean, our room was full. We used the big conference room for that one, and it was full, and that's because not everybody showed up. It was a long meeting. It was contentious. It was one of the more stressful of the meetings, I would say. But it shows that he obviously has the support out there. And maybe it was the video that worked. I don't know. Something else that's right, his rap video or the pink. I don't know. Something else that stuck out to me was the low turnout, which we know, and I think we just come to expect it, and just it is what it is. But it's sad to me, and 15%. And then the youth voters. I know your daughter voted for the first time, which I have very fond memories of the first time my son voted too. It's really a special day when that happens. And but it's more, and that's something else for Prop A is maybe if more young voters would have voted, maybe it would have gone a different way for them. But, you just not enough people voting. And that's just the story of the election here on these kind of municipal elections all the time.
That's right. I mean, it actually, in looking at it, was a little less than we had in Bexar County voting in 2021. We had 17%, this time 15%. It's actually, I think, the second best that we've done in 18 years. If you look at those during the years, like when Julian Castro was mayor, I mean, we were seeing like 7-8%. So relatively speaking, it seems like, well, it's pretty good, but it's awful. I mean,
it's just, you're making it sound like a huge victory.
I know.
When I went to vote, it was empty, and I went to vote on a Saturday, the last Saturday of early voting on that, and I went to Lionsfield Park, and I went in, and I was like, I went straight in. It was less than 5 minutes for the whole thing. There were two people in front of me, and I thought, well, that's convenient. And then I thought, how sad. It's not enough people care about this. Another one that I was interested in is Succor. That was interesting to me as well. I saw into something that caught my attention last week on her was. What's his name? Shea Serrano. He had he did this tweet about her, and I thought it was really interesting. It showed me a different. We met with her, and she was impressive as well. But just showed well. He basically gave her the nod, right? And he played her up, and he said, back in the day when we were teachers together, we would ball, we play ball together and stuff, and put it out there.
It didn't hurt. I'm sure, he's got a pretty megaphone.
Yeah.
What stood out to you, Kerry?
Like Greg said, it was a surprisingly status quo election, but District 1, I think we all expected Bravo to get into a runoff, but he came in second significantly. She got a third.
Yeah, and Jeremy Roberts wasn't that far behind. Just a few percentage points.
District 7 and 2, what's interesting, at least for me going in, I had this, which is kind of contradictory. I had this notion that Gavito was going to not need a runoff, and I just assumed that Jalen would. And
I know a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and so Jalen's the one that really surprised me because I just assumed with all of those candidates, and all of them were good. I just assumed there would be a runoff, but it says a lot for his ground game, and perhaps for his youth that he got folks out there, older folks also.
Yeah, and it kind of undercut his opponent's argument that he was out of touch with the East Side. If so, he probably wouldn't have done as well.
I heard an interview he did. I just heard this morning, and it wasn't for our paper, but basically he just said that what they do during campaign season, he does all the time. So he goes and he knocks on doors. He and his staff knock on doors. They do this monthly newsletter, and they keep communication open. And so I guess it worked.
I think, you have to have, didn't Bill Clinton have what they called a permanent campaign? Was that the
always,
thing? Yeah. And I think that's probably a good, good advice for anybody who gets elected to council to treat it that way, that your constituent services, approach is like, I'm campaigning all the time. And which reminds me of John Courage on the north side in District 9. And, one of the things that was kind of going around in recent weeks was that, John Courage has a long history as a Democrat. He ran for office many times and was defeated running as a Democrat before he got elected to city council in the most conservative district in the city. So there was always this feeling that one of these times some conservative is going to knock him off. It never happened. This was his fourth time. And he was against Prop A. He was actually one of the 3 council members who walked off the dais because he didn't even want to go through the formality of voting to put it on the ballot. But even though he was against Prop A, there was this, people were saying, this is, we have a situation here where a lot of conservatives on the north side are really upset. They're riled up. They're going to vote against Prop A, and they might end up voting for his chief opponent, who is a Republican. And so John Courage could get voted out even, this could be this unintended consequence of it. Did not happen. He got 60-some%. He won easily. And I think one of the things that you've always heard about John Courage is that he emphasized constituent services and constituent engagement. And so I've heard many people tell me over the years, the anecdotal stuff about, my mom's she's Trump supporter and everything. And she says, hey, I like John Courage. I vote for John Courage because, he's doing a good job for us. And so I think that came through.
Well, 2 and 5 also. Because even earlier on, I was given some rumblings that maybe, Castillo could be in trouble. People looking at numbers. Yeah. But it says a lot about, probably more than anything about constituent services of all 3, 2, 5, and 9. And granted, Courage was against it. But that voters were able to make, especially in 2 and 5, were able to make this nuanced distinction between the candidate, the council person who they support, and this proposition which they didn't. They weren't going to necessarily connect Jalen or Terry with Prop A. They were able to separate it.
One of the things that, when Jalen and Terry were elected together in 2 years ago, and these were, Bernie Sanders, progressives in the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. In both cases, you had people saying, "Oh, there's the business community they're going to try to get these people voted out immediately. They've already lining up candidates." It didn't happen. Terry Castillo is particularly interesting to me because there's sort of an openness there. She was on our podcast talking about working with Tony Gonzalez, the Republican congressman, on a project. I think he was at her lecture.
He congratulated her. He tweeted. He was there. This nice tweet about congratulating her on her victory and saying, "Hey, met your dad." I don't know if they'd met before, but he's Navy vet too.
Diametrically opposed ideologically.
But we need more of that.
No. It was heartwarming.
Come together. Hello.
I don't remember if we talked about it on the podcast. But one thing that stood out to me a few months ago when Clayton Perry came back to the council, I think it was his first meeting after the horrible hit and run accident that he was involved in, where he was intoxicated. And he walked on the dais, and Terry Castillo it was clearly not like this was a planned thing. It was very spontaneous, emotional reaction. She got up from her seat and just gave him a quick hug and then sat down again. And it wasn't like a look at me it was no political statement. It was just, I don't think it was in any way condoning what he had done. It was just, this is a colleague. This is somebody who I like personally. And I just felt something emotional. And that said to me, because again, we don't see it that much. Yeah. And I think there's just a sort of a emotional openness there and willingness to work with people that we might not have anticipated 2 years ago. I didn't know that much about her at the time. A lot of us didn't. And, that I think has been really interesting to watch. It really stood out to me that you had Jalen, Terry Castillo, Sukor in District 1, all supporting Prop A and doing very well. Sukor finishes 8 percentage points ahead of the incumbent Mario Bravo there. That was a surprise. As Greg said, we all knew he was going to be in a runoff. Yeah. And it didn't surprise me that it was her. Right. But just the actual numbers were,
it's the worst scenario. Just looking at this at the end of 2022, going into this year, if you wanted to picture the worst scenario for Mario, it would be to be in a runoff with a woman candidate.
And you have to assume that she's probably talking with Jeremy Roberts, trying to get his endorsement. And what do you think, Gilbert? Would the mayor get involved in this race?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. You think he's
not publicly. No.
So no endorsement.
He was as we know, when the incident happened last September, where Mario Bravo berated then Councilwoman Ana Sandoval, his former romantic partner, at the council chambers, the mayor was pretty quick to denounce it, and he was kind of leading the charge when they came to censuring Mario Bravo. Yeah. But I think he might stay out as far as an endorsement. And Mario Bravo has made the point since Saturday that Iran, if it's a completely different election, you're not going to have Prop A on the ballot getting people there. You're not going to have a mayoral election. It's going to be a smaller turnout. All that's true. Mm-hmm. But the elements that were there for his election were also there for all the other council incumbents that won easily. Mm-hmm. So clearly, there had been some talk that he's good with the neighborhood organizations and they like him. And I was reminded Saturday in talking to somebody, you can sometimes get blinded a little bit with by what we hear from neighborhood groups. And ultimately, you go to these forums. I mean, Sucor was having a really rough time at these forums because they would ask about Prop A, and she supported it, and there was a lot of people were unhappy about that. Then outside of that, on the progressive side of things, she was getting a lot of criticism because she, as an education consultant, she's worked with charter schools. Mm-hmm. And actually, when Shea Serrano tweeted his support, some of the comments were, "Oh, the charter school person, I can't support her." So when you looked at all this stuff, it was easy to think, "Oh, she's going to have the climate's going to be really difficult for her, and maybe he's going to do very well." And I think this showed that the neighborhood groups ultimately, or at least the people that show up at the forums, it's really a pretty small percentage of the electorate. Yeah, and there were people who came out of what happened last September thinking, I can't vote for him. Right.
Yeah, I think that on the charter school point, I've worked, full disclosure, when I was a teacher, I worked public schools and I did 1 year at a charter school, IDEA. And so I'm not against charter schools, although I see them for what they are as well. But I do think that they have an important role in education. And that's not the boogeyman right now for education. That is school vouchers.
Absolutely.
And giving public funds to private schools, right? Talk about indoctrination, right? So I don't think that, I know that you'll see that on Twitter and social media, but I don't think that charter schools are as... that's not the big threat right now.
Yeah, I don't think that's been a fair criticism of her, but it's something that, as we know, it's been kind of going around. So I wanted to mention, maybe get into a little bit more of the politics behind Prop A. I think that it was going to go down to defeat. I think regardless of a lot of money was spent against it, probably was going to go down to defeat regardless. And there's clearly some legitimate arguments to be made against it, which is, namely that there were people who felt it was important to have officer discretion in some of these misdemeanor cases to give officers the chance to make these calls. There was, I think, a valid point made that there were so many issues bundled together that that was problematic. Maybe they should have been separated. And I think some people looked and thought, if it passes, we're going to have a legal mess. The city's not going to enforce it, and we're going to have lawsuits. There was already a pending lawsuit over the abortion provision. So I understand those arguments. The thing that started to bother me as we got into the race was some of the fear mongering that happened over it. We talked last week. We looked at some of the mailers, and you had the people with the hoodies, and the idea that we're going to have rampant theft. But the domestic violence issue is one that crept up, and the San Antonio Safe Pack had an ad where they said this is going to create. Prop A is going to create a dangerous situation. They had depictions of domestic violence in the ad, and said that it was going to allow the abuser to stay, in the home. And the thing I wanted to make clear, and look, the election's over, but I just wanted to make clear where this was coming from is the fact that Prop A imposed mandated cite and release for all Class C misdemeanors, which are the lowest form or the least serious form of misdemeanor. Now, the city police department had been citing and releasing individuals for Class C misdemeanors well before they even expanded the cite and release program in 2019 to include other offenses. So it's something that the city's been doing for a long time. And under Class C misdemeanors, we have something that's called Class C assault. And as it's defined, it is physical contact that really doesn't lead to any bodily injury to somebody. An example I think could be like if you have two people having an argument at a bar and one person bumps the other one or pushes the other one, something along those lines. Any form of aggression against somebody is something to be taken seriously, and I don't want to minimize that. But these are classified as Class C misdemeanors for a reason, which is that they're generally perceived as pretty minor offenses. There is no jail sentence for Class C misdemeanor in the state of Texas. The maximum sentence that you can get for that is a $500 fine. And the city, police department spokesperson told the Express News a few months ago that in almost every Class C misdemeanor case currently, the police department is citing and releasing people. So I don't know. And I'm interested in hearing what you all say. It felt to me like using these images of domestic violence and suggesting this is going to create a dangerous situation when the city has already been citing and releasing people for Class C misdemeanors for years. I felt it was kind of deceptive and that it was kind of unfair.
I think it's pretty much agreed that both sides exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in cases actually lied about what it was or wasn't going to do. All the arguments against Prop A, our editorial board came out strongly against it, and it went down the way it went down because, across ideological lines, district lines, whatever lines, because of the way it was put together. But the thing that has bothered me for the longest was the demonization of the activists, the demonization of these, and mostly women, these young women who, whatever you think of the specifics of each of the pieces of it and the way it was put together, was still trying to do something to help their community. And the way that they were demonized as not only supporting criminals, but almost being criminals themselves was despicable. Mm-hmm. And I told y'all before the podcast, I supported our editorial board's position against Prop A, but I voted for it. Mm-hmm. Just because of the demonization of the activists.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I voted against it, but as I wrote in my column before, it was hard to vote against it. I wasn't excited. I wasn't, and this is my first San Antonio election since moving back here from Cibolo. Mm-hmm. But it was a bit sad, because so many of the issues there I support, but it's just so problematic for all the reasons you very articulately just described. But yeah, when we talked to Ananda and her supporters as an editorial board, I was impressed with them, and they want to make a difference. And as a voter, I want to help them, right? And as a columnist and with this platform, I want to help, but I just couldn't come to terms with doing that. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I caught a television ad by the anti-Prop A group. It was the police unions PAC that paid for the ad. It was. I don't know how many times they used the words radical activists. Yeah. And compared our city to Seattle, Portland, Boston. So clearly, they did engage in a lot of demonization, like you described, Gary. Totally. Mm-hmm. Kind of despicable.
It was really remarkable when you really kind of broke this proposition down issue by issue, how much of it was simply about codifying policies that were already in place. I mean, there was really the changes. I think graffiti was going to be a change, and I think that was again, that was fair game to say I don't agree with that being added to the cite and release policy. But a lot of it was about just codifying and making mandatory policies that were already in place, but maybe just not mandatory.
Right. And that's how they describe it to Ananda and their supporters. But I think when it comes down to it comes down to not giving discretion to police officers. And in the rare instance where maybe, it could remove someone, an abuser or someone that has maybe a long rap sheet, but this time they didn't punch the lady in the face, right? Even though that is what the ad said, that was misleading. Mm-hmm. Maybe this time they didn't punch the lady in the face, but they roughed her up and let's just, in this scenario, a man and his girlfriend and he roughed her up and pushed her against the wall, but it's not punching her. It's not an assault, right? It's not a serious assault. There's probably no marks on her, but he is using his strength against her, and he used intimidation. And maybe in that instance, a police officer get called to the scene and be able to remove him for just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a discretion issue. That's what. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so when you take that discretion away from officers, even though, as you say, the data doesn't show that happens very often, you just don't want to take that discretion away. So to me, and I know Marta Pelias from Family Violence Prevention, from the Battered Women's Shelter. I mean, she wrote about that too, and there's a little exaggeration there too. But I think when it comes down to it, the exaggeration on both sides, I mean, that's going to happen. There's nothing really that limits them. I mean, they can say they can do what they're going to do and mislead all they want. But when it comes down to it, that proposition was so long. And people did not understand it. And I mean, I know when I went to vote, there's only a few people in front of me. It was a very short line. It took less than 5 minutes. But I didn't see anybody like sitting there reading every word. They knew what they were going to do at the beginning, or maybe they guessed. I mean, I don't know if they keep up with the news and understand it.
That was actually a pretty common thing we were hearing throughout early voting. We would check in with, campaign operatives, political consultants, and several of them said, look, there are people showing up to the polls just to vote for or against Prop A, and that's why they're there. And they're in and out. They're not studying this proposition.
It's true.
The details, what's actually in front of them didn't particularly matter. They'd already formed an opinion. They knew how they were going to vote, and they didn't waste time.
Yeah. The advertising really worked. Whatever issues I might have with it, I think it was effective.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things I get to is that I think they probably would have gone down to defeat regardless. I don't feel like the people who opposed it needed to go to those links to make the argument against. Before we wrap things up, I'm going to probably ask you all the same question, maybe in 2 years, possibly. But now that Mayor Nirenberg has been elected for a fourth time,
Don't start with me.
Okay, we're just kind of spitballing here, but do we see him finishing this fourth term? Do we see him getting appointed? Because I think we all have to question, where does he go from here?
Well, the appointment, this would be the Biden appointment that never seemed to materialize. Like this rumor has been kind of kicking around for a while. Let me say, and hopefully I'm here in 2 years, but
me too.
I think Nirenberg will be too. I think he actually finishes his term.
I'm just doing the math. And it doesn't contradict each other. And he'll be here in 2 years, and should there be an appointment, it would be assuming that there's another Biden-Harris administration. It'd be in first 4 months.
You don't think Trump would appoint him?
I think he'll finish it out.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for listening. Hope everyone's doing well. We'll be back next week. Take care.